Welcome to United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America on WSGW. Now, here is your host, Kareem Bowen.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America. We're here today with my entire crew. I am so glad to be able to speak. I am hearing the words come out of my mouth, and it sounds like a symphony. For those who do not know, and you guys weren't aware until I told you today, I got hit with a bout of pneumonia, and it was no fun whatsoever. There's a lot of nasty stuff out there in the air: RSV, pneumonia, COVID. Michigan, Wolverines, all of that stuff is out there somewhere. And so we're having to combat and deal with this stuff as we get hit with it. I want to say hello to my main man, the producer, John B, in the place to be. What's good, John?
Go Blue.
I saw the chuckle when I talked about all the nasty stuff out there in the air. And we also have with us in the studio, in his home studio, both Mark and I. Mark Bassett, what's good?
How's it going? Good to be here.
I am good. We are both in our home studios, which Jonathan absolutely loves. How we're able to stay home and produce these amazing shows
I have to come in
in the comforts of our own home.
You're getting paid though. I'm doing this for free.
But it's so good to see you guys. It was touch and go for a second there. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to see my team again. So it's good to be here with you guys. We have what I consider a very fun show in store for you guys today as we talk about facing our fears and overcoming those obstacles. I'm excited about it because I know that at the beginning of every year, we make these resolutions or these promises to ourselves that this year I'm going to do this. I'm going to start a business. I'm going to, enter or change my career, whatever those things are. And through the course of time, we find ourselves falling back and not necessarily doing or following through with the things that we said that we were going to do. So one of the things that I've recognized is that many people are really fearful of change. And I always tell people that change is necessary, change is inevitable, and change is your friend. So I'm in studio today. Mark, why are you laughing at me?
I was going to just say, I have this thing about stepping outside of your zone of comfort is scary, but it's the greatest opportunity for both professional and personal growth.
Say that one more time.
I said, stepping outside your change is stepping outside your zone of comfort. So everyone likes to be comfortable, but stepping outside of that zone of comfort, so change, really is the best opportunity for growth, both professionally and personally.
I would agree. I would agree with you 100%. As we learned on last week, for those of you who are listening, we are living a real life experiment with our producer, John B. John B. I feel like we're like proud pops and uncles cheering him on as he goes through this experiment called life. And he's beginning this real extreme process of adulting and
let's start a pool. Maybe we should have a pool for our audience. Like, when is Jonathan going to get married? He's very mature for his age. He's getting a house. I think we should start a pool for when Jonathan's going to get married.
Jonathan is probably like, if you want to start a pool, how about you start a pool to help me take care of some of the bills and that's the pool I want to be a part of. But it's good to have you guys here today. I want to start off as we talk about what's hot off the press. There is so much going on as we are preparing to turn the corner of this week. And Mark, you said that there is some amazing weather coming up for us here in Michigan this weekend.
Yeah, supposedly, at least in Midland, we're expecting over a foot of snow over Friday night. So.
Well, if it's snowing in Midland, I'm sure here in the heart, the breadbasket of Saginaw, it's probably going to be a balmy 70 degrees, I would think. Wouldn't you say, Jonathan?
Yeah, there's enough of a difference there that no, I was supposed to move this weekend. That's not happening.
So are we all supposed to be hit with a major thunderstorm, or not thunderstorm, but snowstorm?
Yeah, it's going to be
I'm pulling it up right now.
pretty much the entire state
Saginaw.
of Michigan is going to have some fun. I'm sure our listeners in Illinois over at WJOL are going to have their fair share of either
You know what's
snow or mixed rain and snow or something.
Yeah,
and I
interestingly
was
enough, Saginaw is less overnight. They're 3 to 5 inches overnight, and Midland is 8 to 12 overnight. So
By
they
the
know
time
these
we get to
brothers.
Sunday, it'll all be pretty much equal.
They know the
Yeah.
brothers are not coming outside if we get over 2 inches of snow.
Oh,
It is a
actually, I
snow
just
day
pulled
in
up-
my heart and in my mind.
I just pulled up Midland again. They've downgraded it to 5 to 8 overnight, but
Oh, no
that's
problem.
that's still a lot of snow. It's 1 to 3 during the day, 5 to 8 overnight.
So we want to thank you all that are tuning in here via WSGW. If you're watching one of the social media platforms, thank you for coming in. And those folks down there at WJOL in Joliet, we know that if Michigan to get snow, sometimes that western side of the lake gets a huge lake effect.
Yeah.
And so we're praying that things are well with you all as well. But we're turning the corner, and as we dig out of whatever takes place this weekend, we are preparing to celebrate, or at least remember, the iconic Dr. Martin Luther King on next week. There are so many celebrations that are taking place. I hope that you take, most places have Monday off as a day of observance. And I'm hoping that everyone that is listening, if you hear this, if you catch this, that you make this not a day off, but you make it a day. Many things, at least in this Great Lakes Bay region, to be a part of. There's the annual march that Delta College does every single week. I think it's like it's usually, there's going to be a cold day. It seems to be that is the coldest day of the year, when all the Black people decide that they're going to go outside and do their three or four block historic march. And I don't think that it was this cold going from Selma, but anyways, that takes place, and it seems like it's usually freezing on that day, but that takes place on next week. I also want to give mention, the Dow Treasure Academy is doing a 2-day service on this coming Monday the 15th from 11 a.m. to 2. They're collecting soup and socks. We're trying to warm hearts, bellies, and feet. And then on next Saturday, the 20th, there will be a free food distribution, an entire food truck coming out in partnership with Parishioners on Patrol. These 11th graders now, I've been with them since they've been in 9th grade. These 11th graders have decided to impact and show their way of committing to the dream by taking care of their fellow man. So there's a soup and sock drive. Go to dowtreasureacademy.com for more information on that. There is also, and Jonathan, I want your help on this because there is a forum that is slated to take place. Focus on the Black community on Monday. Now, I'm really excited about this. And the reason I'm excited about this, Art Lewis and I always have a conversation. He says, Kareem, there are some things, that I think are happening that are so important for people to take part and get involved. And he says, so what is the Black community doing? And so for the first time in a very long time, there is a forum where the community is going to address assets, liabilities, the issues that are in place, and what needs to be done in the community to benefit and better position the community. So I'm excited about that. Do you have information on that? I think, I know that you had a release. It's coming on Monday at 7 p.m. at CAC.
Monday, January 15th at Saginaw CAC. That's on Perkins Street from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m.
There has been a tremendous response already leading up to this. My brothers and sisters over at CAP Community Alliance for the People are putting together this event. So if you are around, make sure you get involved and listen to that. And then on next week, just to put this out there, a shameless plug, but Ascension St. Mary's is hosting an MLK program. They're really trying to connect with the community. And on next Thursday, the 18th, at 11 a.m. to 12 noon, there will be an MLK program, and yours truly will be the keynote. So I guess it's good that I finally got my voice back. We are excited about what's happening. So many opportunities to remember and to celebrate the dream. When you guys think about MLK, what are some of the things that comes to mind? When my white brothers talk about MLK, what are some of the things that you guys think about?
Oh, wow. Well, you're really putting us on the spot.
Absolutely, my light-skinned brothers.
I mean, I think more about, obviously, I'm not as personally impacted by Martin Luther King. I think about the historical aspects of it, the marches to, with the big groups, kind of interracial groups, the I Have a Dream speech, unfortunately, the assassination. So I think about kind of more of the historical events and that kind of he was a central part of.
I think about kind of the legacy of racial equality that he fought for, and then the struggle continued in his name after his death. I think that lasting nature, whereas a lot of people have contributed to causes like racial equality and many other causes, his name is one that has stuck so well. And then on the other side of it, the historical side of it, I think of the fact that he was definitely not killed by the federal government. When I put my tinfoil hat on,
Jonathan, how we get all the way to this conspiracy bill that quickly?
You asked me what I think of, so that's what comes to mind.
That's hilarious. Okay,
is that a conspiracy theory out there that the federal government killed him?
You haven't heard that?
Oh,
no, I don't listen to conspiracy theories. I had not heard that.
Now MLK, especially when they talk about Malcolm X, there's a whole conversation, and he had, there was a lot going on with him and Castro and Egypt. But yes, there are those theories out there. I wouldn't expect you guys to know that, but Jonathan, kudos for understanding and knowing that is a part of Black culture.
Pretty compelling too.
What's that?
It's pretty compelling too when you talk about the MLK assassination.
So I think of the fact that we have a program like this, a program titled United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America. Could you imagine us having this conversation in 1967? What that would look like? Some of the things that I say, I think I would be hanging from a poplar tree from somewhere. There'd be a lynching of sorts. Go ahead, Jonathan.
In a lot of ways, I think it's interesting that you ask that, though, because I think people were a lot more honest about what they were thinking about this issue in that time. I think so much fear has gone up around the conversation, fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of offending somebody, that the likelihood of having an honest conversation about race was higher then than maybe in some recent years. And now the opinions that were held in that time are absolutely wrong, but people were honest about them. And people were not afraid to say what they thought and what they meant by what they were saying. Whereas in recent years, in the past few decades even, that honesty with other people and the honesty with yourself about what you think about tough issues like this has kind of gone away somewhat.
Jonathan, this is what I love about you. And our audience may be lost by some of them, but you are you're so much younger than Mark is, yet you have such a wisdom. Notice I said younger than Mark. You have a wisdom and an understanding of things, and the way that you present those details and effects. This is why I love you being a part of this conversation. Jonathan, I want to follow up this. What do you think the impact of that change has been in terms of having real meaningful conversations that really make change happen as it relates to race, going from a time when people were very open about what they said till now the cancel culture has taken over? You say the wrong thing and you delete it. What do you think the change has been?
I think
What's
the
been the
change.
impact?
I think it's fear. I think it genuinely is fear, and the fact that people are afraid of saying the wrong things makes buzzwords very popular, because you can hop on this notion of equity. I'm fighting for equity. Well, what does that mean? What does that look like? What do you want to see out of it? Well, I'm not equity. You know, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those are some buzzwords that get jumped on. And while the ends themselves are probably good things to fight for, people can't really say what they mean or what they actually want to see happen, because they may be accused of going too far. They may be accused of reverse racism. They may be accused of not going far enough. And you really don't care about the Black community if you're not fighting for at least this much. And people are, it's fear around this kind of conversation.
And so, Mark, I'm thinking about when we first started this program, and this program has evolved in such an interesting way. And when we connected, we were so different, and we've talked about this before. But it was the differences that I really liked, and how we were able to present those differences, how we were able to yell at each other and get on each other's nerves, and then at the end of this, okay, you want to go grab lunch and come back.
Well, that was the point of the show, is to show that you don't have to agree, and you can have difference of opinion, but you try to respectfully understand where the other person is coming from. And while you may not agree with that position, you understand it and respect it. And that doesn't mean you can't continue to like each other or work with each other to make a difference. And then, like I'll always remember, when they had that picture, and it's got nothing to do with Ellen DeGeneres, but Ellen DeGeneres with George Bush, the son, at a football game, and all the people who are left leaning were like, how could Ellen DeGeneres talk to George Bush? And and she was basically ostracized for that. And to me, that's just so ridiculous, that just because you have differences of opinion and you may not believe what that person is trying to achieve or wanting to achieve, or how they're trying to achieve it, that you can't have a dialogue with somebody else. That's just so ridiculous.
Mark, you were sharing a story, and it comes to mind hearing us have this portion of conversation. You were sharing a story once about how you didn't necessarily understand the impact that certain things were in terms of their racial impact, and how having your
daughter-in-law,
how you were able, because of the relationship, you were able to see things through a different lens because it brought things closer to home. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, my daughter-in-law is very Hispanic, first generation, very Mayan, so very short, dark, etc. And there's two stories really. One, she's married to my son, who's obviously very white, and their kids tend to be
Really?
yeah, very light skinned. And so anytime she was with their oldest daughter, everyone assumed she was a nanny, first of all, but I think the story you're really referring to is that anytime she would go into Tiffany's, the security paid very close attention to her and would kind of follow her around and make sure nothing was going on. And, she just shared with me on a very personal level. She was listening to our show and telling me how much she appreciated it. And that we had a discussion about something like that. And it's easy to kind of intellectually understand, like, oh yeah, that must suck. But it becomes something much more personal when you sit down and talk to someone you know and love about it, and they explain to you how much it impacts them and how it really makes them feel. And it all of a sudden becomes much more real and personal versus something that's just intellectual.
And I think that is so interesting. Two things come out of that. First of all, I see that. Thanks, Jonathan. The first thing is that Jonathan and I need to go get some picket signs, and we're gonna have our own march, because we often say all the time, Mark, you got some rich man problems. We're trying not to be watched going around Walmart, he and I, and your kids are camping out at Tiffany's. Hey, we no
Tiffany's
Roger,
isn't
no
that
rerun, no
expensive,
rent.
man. You can buy something at Tiffany's for $100.
But that's one thing. But the other thing that I think is so very important, it is amazing how interracial marriages and children that are biracial have made such an impact on the fight against what's the fight against racism, and how a family could be very racist in one point, and their daughters come in and they have these biracial children. They may be angry, but it's funny how many places I go and I see these nice little lily white grandmothers walking with biracial kids with curly hair all over their heads, and they are absolutely in love with those children, which gives us an understanding that when we begin to create a culture of a relational culture, that love truly covers a multitude of sins. And one of the challenges to really making an impact and seeing Dr. King's dream come alive is when we position ourselves in places like what we're seeing on the screen today, and we have the opportunity to simply build relationships. Jonathan, what do you think would have been had you not been assigned to temporarily sit in on this show? What do you think the chances of us having a meaningful relationship would have been in life?
Probably pretty slim. Working in the news department, I think I'd have run across you and interviewed you a couple of times, but never would have met Mark. Don't think so. I think the thing that's really special about this show and about the kinds of conversations that this show aims to inspire is, have we ever seriously thrown any sort of accusation at one another? Has any one person on this show ever accused another person legitimately of something? Like you've called me a Trump supporter before, but it was a joke. I don't think we've ever thrown an accusation, and I think that that's kind of the key to having this kind of conversation. And I think it's because of that level of trust that's kind of been built up here.
And I don't know how we're doing with time, and you're going to show me that in just a second, I'm sure. Um, Mark, something that he said was so important. We've never thrown an accusation. What has brought a level of comfort for you to be able to have these courageous conversations that we're having?
Well, I mean, you made a commitment to always protect me, because as I told you, I really wanted to do this kind of on the naive kind of premise of, like, again, to set an example that you can have these conversations and they can be civil, they can be respectful, and you can still be friends. But you've mentioned this a few times, of like, there was nothing, frankly, but downside for me personally doing this show. And I'll always remember early on, and when it was, I don't know, in the first handful of shows, you got a couple kind of messages online about, that Mark is a racism denier. And I remember who said that. And then someone else said, I was smiling because, it was, it was a serious subject, but I was smiling. And someone didn't like the fact that I was smiling. And you came to my defense in both cases and said, hey, that needs to stop. Mark's a good guy, and you really came to defend me, which I really appreciated.
And I think that is so very important. If we're going to have honest conversations, we've got to be willing, one, to stop hurling accusations, two, to process a little bit of grace in everything that we do, and number three, be willing to say at base, let's get this understanding that once we say what we're going to say, we come back and we get an understanding. And all you're getting an understanding. We're going to take a quick commercial break. After this, we'll be back with more United Shades of Gray.
You're listening to United Shades of Grey on WSGW.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are tuned in to United Shades of Grey. We are in our second half here. We're so excited to be with you today. We have been having a lot of fun, really challenging as we look at Dr. King's holiday and his commemoration of his birthday coming up. Why don't we challenge ourselves on that Monday that we have off to do something courageous? Let's go out and learn. Let's build relationships across generations, across racial lines, and let's really begin to do the work to bring Dr. King's legacy into full fruition. All right, so those of you who are here today, we're going to talk about facing fears and overcoming obstacles in this new year with a desire to do something different. We have to go through change. And as I said at the top of the hour, remind yourself that change is your friend, change is necessary, and change is inevitable. Now, according to a Very Well Mind, which is an online well-being website that I was actually reading up on some other things, I came across this particular conversation, which I thought was really interesting. And it talks ways to face your fears. Jonathan, are there fears that you have? What is your greatest fear? Let's start there. What is your greatest fear, guys?
Stagnation. Getting too comfortable, getting too content, and not moving.
Okay. Mark, that's good. Jonathan, go ahead. Were you going to say something else?
No, you're good.
Mark, what is your greatest fear that you face on a daily basis?
Oh, well, I don't know that I face the fear on a daily basis. I think as a parent, you're always, there's a fear of your kids and are they going to be okay? And are they, I think, so there's a kind of a constant fear around just kind of the continued well-being and of your children. I think another one, which you're going to laugh at, because I came, when we first got married with 2 kids, we had nothing. But money is a fear I have, especially now that I have no real income coming in. So,
wow, yeah, I'm not gonna laugh about that, Mark. That's a very real feeling. What most people don't realize, or we don't take into account, we often judge people based upon where they currently are in life, but we often don't take into consideration that trauma and experiences in our past are sometimes very hard to shake and to let go. So if you weren't born into a situation with the silver spoon in your mouth, then those times when years were lean, money was lean, are always at the back of your mind. Nobody wants to go back to situations of that.
Yeah, and that's where I've dealt, with my kids. That's where a lot of the fear comes from as well, because we've with 7 kids, we've dealt with some pretty tough situations. We've had mental health issues, physical issues, and really, really tough situations. I won't go through in detail online, but pretty scary that we've gotten through to the other side. But that fear still, that going through that trauma still sits in you. So,
and we're going to talk. And Mark, I think a lot of what you've experienced, and you've allowed yourself willingly to go through in terms of how you're dealing with some of the issues and just making sure that we bring counselors and therapists in. We want to talk about that because many people, especially, and I say this all the time, in Black communities, we're doing better about seeking help and finding ways to deal with those issues. But there is a real sense of fear for some reason that we have in our community about what we would say. I know I could always hear my grand, you don't air your dirty laundry in public. And so combating those thoughts, those ideas, overcoming those fears, and really finding help is such an important thing. Okay, in terms of my personal fear, and it's crazy, my greatest fear in life, and this is so true, is I don't want to die with anything left in my tank. My greatest fear is not dying empty, if that makes sense.
sure.
I don't want to live with regrets. I don't want to live with things that I wish I had done or opportunities I wish I had pursued. In so many ways, people are like, dude, you do a lot. It's because I really want to make sure that the time that has been allotted on each end of the dash of my life show me really pushing to pursue and to pour out of me everything I've been blessed to have inside.
That line of thought is what drove me to make a couple major changes in my career trajectory, because I didn't want to say, like, I wonder what would have happened if at the end of my career. And that was what you just talked about, was what drove me to go in fundamentally different directions that I had been going on. So,
all right. So when we think about facing fears, we're told by a very well mind that we have to evaluate the risks. Sometimes fears come simply by not knowing very much about the things that we're dealing with. When we talk about evaluating fears, and do you guys have any type of like phobia? Is there anything that like you are really
super afraid of heights?
Really?
I am the exact opposite. I don't mind heights, but I hate depths, like very deep places, like holes,
Like a
caves,
cave
stuff
or
like that.
something.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid of heights or holes or caves, but you know what it is a fear that I experience. I fear elevators. For some
So
reason,
a little bit of claustrophobia.
it's not the claustrophobia in my
Okay.
mind. Somewhere as a kid, I'm telling you, I was traumatized. There was some movie that I saw that people were on this elevator. I don't know, it was like the Empire State Building or something, and the cables broke, and this thing like lunged toward the earth in so much speed, and everybody was pancaked. And ever since that time, I do not like being on elevators. I don't like going up or going down on elevators. So it's something that, if there's a couple of steps, I would prefer to take the steps than the elevator. And when I was spending time in New York, oh my gosh, it was the worst.
It's impossible.
It
Yeah.
was impossible.
Yeah.
And then to be in New York and Chicago, when you're in the elevator, you can feel the building swaying.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Those are things that I wish that we could do it. So when I do that, how are you guys? Have you ever taken the time to really examine the risk of why, or evaluate the risks of why you have a fear of heights, Mark?
No, it just exists. Yeah. I've never figured out, I've never thought why. Just sitting here, it's a great question. Just sitting here thinking about why, nothing comes to mind, to be honest with you, of why. It's a common one. So,
My mom has a very interesting one, and I think it's one that a lot of Black folks have. I'm not a fan of them. I don't like big ones, but she has a major fear of snakes. So much that when we get new books, or when I was a kid, and I'm dating myself because there was something that used to come, and we would get volumes of the encyclopedia. Mark, you remember those? You used to write them,
I
didn't
do.
you?
We've got a couple sets in the house.
So when the Britannica Encyclopedia, where you get a volume, we would have to go through the books and actually, with a black permanent marker, like cross out all the pictures of a snake, because whenever she just sees the images, Survivor is something she loves but cannot watch, because just in the B-roll on TV, she freaks out, when they show the snakes. And to me, I don't understand that level of fear. However, I'm not trying to be in a room. I don't like rubbing pythons, and I see people with snakes around there. Those are things that I can do without. But she has a legitimate fear of seeing those things and the reaction. And I asked her, Mom, when you look at why you are so afraid. And it was funny because before my grandmother died, she says, the reason you're so afraid of those snakes is because when I was carrying you, a huge snake jumped up at her when she was being carried. And is there what would it be, like a neonatal parental?
By carrying, you mean while she was still in womb?
Well, she was still in womb, yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so her entire life, she has had one time. This is so funny. One time, it's not funny. It's funny in retrospect because she's okay. We were, working with wood chips, and there were a number of family members around. And while she, was working and she had her gloves, she picks up a bunch of wood chips, and in there was a garter snake. And when I tell you she lost it, she's trying to climb up the side of a van. One of my older cousins had to like slap her, like, come to, but she completely lost. I don't understand that level of fear.
Yeah, I don't have that level of fear for heights.
But it is a very real thing. But let's talk about this in terms of that, creating an action plan. If you are suffering in some area of your life that causes you fear, and I think that this, and we can look at this not from the extreme fears, but Mark, for folks, as you were talking about when you were making life changes, you were afraid, hey, I don't want to miss out. I don't want to stay where I am for fear of taking a chance. What were some of the things, it says create an action plan. What were some of the things that you mentally had to prepare yourself for, to say, you know what, I've been doing this for a while. I don't want to stay here, and this is not what I see as my end result. How did you begin to coach yourself to make that change happen?
Oh, well, I mean, I think that one was more, at least intellectually, I told myself, like, okay, I was going to go from R&D to finance, with the idea it was going to lead to something else. And basically, I just said, hey, look, I'm gonna go for this because I don't want to be the old R&D guy down at the end of the hall that says, I had that chance, I didn't take it, I wonder what would have happened. But basically what I told myself, it was a risk reward. And this is how I make a lot of decisions. It's probability and risk reward. And it was the risk was ultimately, if I fail, I can always go back to R&D. It's not going to be the end of the world. And I'll be a better R&D person because of it, because I'll have a much better business understanding of what business values and how the role of R&D in business. And so when it was all said and done, the only real risk is, okay, I derailed my R&D career for a few years, slowed it down, but I can go back and be even better potentially because I have a much broader business understanding. So that was in that particular case, and that's kind of what I did in the other areas as well. The other big decision where I again went to a fundamentally different direction in business, it was that same kind of logic.
Okay, now I want to ask you this question, Mark. Mm-hmm. I think that was great, actively looking from one position to the next when you can eye what's next.
Yep.
You have taken on a challenge, which I think is very interesting, that I think a lot of people can relate to. When you decide, I'm hanging up my cleats here, it's time to retire, I want to do something different. How did you make that type of a transition? Because that is a real upheaval, not just for Mark, but for spouse, for children. It's a changing of identity. It's a renewal of how you're seen by the community that you are part of, and how you see yourself.
Yeah. Are you asking how did I make the transition, or how?
Yeah, because that is a
how
real.
Did I make that decision?
Yeah, no. How did you make the decision? Because that's a very challenging decision.
Well, again, it was a little bit similar to, like how I make all my decisions, risk reward. So ultimately, I looked at what I was doing, and while there were a lot of pluses with it, there are, like anything, there were downsides or costs. And the cost was, when you're the CEO of a $1 billion plus company with major owners, Fortune 50 company owners, it's a job that with an immense amount of pressure. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It never ends. You have to make really heart-wrenching decisions, like letting 15 or 20% of the workforce go. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. There's a lot of pluses, but there's those downsides. There's also a sacrifice your family makes because you're on the road a lot. Even when you're on family vacations, you're not totally present. And so ultimately, I got to a point in my life where it was like, I've been doing this a long time. and I can continue to do it, and I'll have more money, but it won't fundamentally change my I'm financially secure at this point. It won't fundamentally, I won't be 2 times or 3 times as rich working another 2 or 3 or 4 years. And I'm losing another 4 years of my life that my family is sacrificing and not getting their full share of me, or as much as they could have of me. Not that they necessarily wanted that, but they, and then there were some things I was personally interested in that I hadn't pursued because of those jobs. One of which was this underlying feeling at times that I was supposed to have a closer relationship with God that I wasn't ever pursuing. And number 2 of like, God's given me all these gifts that I've used, I think, for the good, doing this one thing, running businesses, running chemical businesses. But is there a different way that I can use these gifts to make a broader impact in the community? And so again, it was just, I can continue with doing what I'm doing. It's all good, but these are the downsides and these are what I'm walking away from. And I'm at a point now in my life where I don't want to walk away from those things anymore. And so I'm going to take that risk. So with that risk comes change and, a new fear of money. Now it's going out versus coming in. But okay, I've been so busy and so focused on doing things. What am I really going to do with my life? And so there's a new set of fears of like, am I going to spend the next 20 or 30 years putzing around the house, or am I actually going to do something? And that's kind of my journey to California, of like really to focus on and try to discern, I've got 20 or 30 years to do something. What is it, God, you really want me to do?
Before you made the decision to retire, was there fear, or was it just weighing the pros and cons and then, okay, I've made the decision, now I've got all these other things to worry about?
No, there's always a fear when you're making a change. So like that first job I talked about, leaving finance to R&D, I really wanted that job. I'll always remember, and I can still hear it today. When I got the call and I got the job offer, I was ecstatic. I hung up. And the very first thing that went through my head was, what the F did I just do? And because it's the fear of like, I am now stepped off the cliff. I've just jumped off the cliff, and I'm gonna, this could be when it's up. I've done all the analysis of the risk reward, and you could do this and you could do that, but it's still an unknown. And there is an innate fear of the unknown.
Mark, I think
the same thing when I retired is like, what the hell? Why did I've gone through that quite like, why did I do that again? So
this was a time, Mark, actually, we were in constant contact at that period of time. Yep. And I remember looking at you and saying to you, like, Mark, there is so much left that you have to offer. And just the assurity that you had that there was something that you needed to do next, but the fear of leaving the thing that really was so tightly composing who you were.
I was.
Yeah, it was who you were.
Super good at it. It's who I was. I mean, I jokingly, and jokes with me are always half truths. Like I went from being somebody to nobody. When you're and again, not that I was, a super bigwig, but when you're the CEO of a company and you're visible in the community, there's a certain amount of ego and, self-assuredness that goes with that. And then the next day you're nothing. You're just some old retired dude. That's something you have to digest and absorb, and it's a change. So
I think what's important that I'm really enjoying about this conversation, and hopefully people are listening, is the fact that high achieving individuals and people who are very active and you find them continually creating and producing things, it's not that they don't experience fear. It's not that they don't sit there and be like, what in the heck am I doing? It's so funny because when you said that, Mark, it was something that I could relate to so many times, because I will sit there and I'll put something together. I'm like, yes, we can do this. And I'll do an amazing job of selling this thing. And then once it's like, okay, yeah, we're going to, then I stop and I'm like going, what the heck have I just done?
Yeah.
Like now I have to really just.
Now you have to actually do it.
I got to actually do it. And I
pitching
think
an idea is the easy thing, frankly. I've always found like a strategy, I mean, it's actually doing it is where the successful people can actually do it. There's a lot of people that can pitch ideas.
so I think it's important. And Jonathan, really, I say this even to you, someone who is really at the beginning of what can be an amazing journey in terms of your life, is that you can never allow where you are, what you currently have, and what your current responsibilities are to keep you in a box where you're afraid to move forward. And because that's I'll tell you, every single time I decide that I'm going to do something different and there's a risk involved, my current situation always yells at me like, "Are you crazy? You got to do this. You're responsible for this." And sometimes I have to quiet the noise inside my own head to be able to really push fear aside and say, you know what? I'm going to jump. You're going to say something, Jonathan.
I don't think that's a problem. Like I said, one of my biggest fears is stagnation. I hate the word content. It's great to be content. It's terrible to be complacent. And there's a very thin line that divides those two things. I've been in a spot where stagnation set in, and it was one of those, I wasn't doing anything and I was comfortable where I was and I wasn't moving forward. And it's one of those, I don't want to go back there. I don't want to be in that position again. So when a new opportunity comes up, I am very much I'll explore it. I'll take the jump if I figure that it's right, and I'll deal with the fears that come with that afterwards. I think I'm pretty good at pushing that aside. But at the same time, that fear of stagnation can sometimes interfere with being content, and it can.
That's the
that aspect of
really
it.
Insightful, Jonathan, because I think a lot of super high achievers, like no matter what I do, it was never good enough. And it was always like every new promotion was like, okay, that's cool. Then 6 months later, it's like, okay. And it drives you to excel. But one of the things I want to work on now is like, you never like live in the moment. You're always looking to the next thing. And so it's how do you find that right balance of what so the fact that at your age, and I always forget how old you are, 23, 24, whatever it is, you have that insight is pretty impressive, because that's not something I realized till much later. So.
One of the things is that I often overlook is taking time to appreciate a particular place. And so we've got to make sure that we take time to do those things. But I want to say this to those of you who are out there who are afraid or just kind of having this anxiety of getting started or taking the leap. I want you to create an action plan. It's okay to have a little bit of fear, but debilitating fear is never good. So, for example, if you're afraid of speaking in front of people, I want you to stand in front of a mirror and give yourself a 2-minute talk. Then we want you to record yourself doing that 2-minute talk, then watch it back. Then watch it with a friend. Then watch it with 2 friends. The idea or the concept here is to allow yourself to be empowered by small incremental steps. And those small incremental steps will provide what you need to be able to overcome the fears that are impacting your life.
That's how like behavioral therapists often deal with things like fear of heights, or like we had a son who had fear of clowns and heights and and loud noises, and that's typically how you got to start in small doses and you build up and up and up.
So if you're out there today and it is the start of a new year, there are so many opportunities that are there. My personal theme for this year is that 2024 is the year of the open door. It's the opportunities that will be presented to you that have the ability to change your life. Seize each opportunity by the horn. Carpe diem, that Robin Williams movie, Dead Poet Society of 20, 30 years ago, always lives rent-free in my head. Seize the moment and watch your life change. Thank you guys for tuning in today. I love you guys. Take care of yourselves and each other. God bless you. Grace and peace.